One day, Christ walked the sands along shore of the Sea of Galilee. He saw two brothers. They were fishermen, Peter and Andrew. And he said to them from the shore, "Follow me." And Scripture says, immediately they left their nets and followed him. Jesus walked a little way further along the shore and saw two more brothers, also fishermen, James and John. And he said to them, "Follow me." And Scripture says they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and followed him. One of the parallel gospel accounts gets right to the point. They weren't just leaving nets or their father. It says, quote, they left everything and followed him. Jesus, right now, is calling every single one of you to just that same act. Now listen, it is a little bit different. These were men who lived in the time of Jesus' earthly life. When he called them to follow him, yes, they had to give everything up immediately in a very practical and tangible way and follow him, bringing nothing with them. True. Jesus' call to you is not identical to that. But in its essence, it is. In its essence, it's not any different. Jesus said this. He said, "Any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple." So had Peter or Andrew, when they heard this rabbi say, "Follow me," had they said, "No, we will stay in the boat," then in essence, what that would communicate is, "Rabbi, we would like to follow you, but what we would like more is our business, our stability, the profits we are making." If Jesus had gone along the shore and seen James and John and said, "Come, follow me," they may have responded, "Rabbi, we would like to, but look, our aging father Zebedee, we need to take care of him. We love him more than we love you." That's what it would be in effect. And so this day, when Jesus comes and calls someone, as he is still doing through his gospel, when he calls to you to follow him, yes, it is not in the same external way for everyone, but the essence of the call is identical. Jesus' call is, if there's anything else you want more than me, you cannot be my disciple. If the main tie of your soul is to anything else, bad or good, and it's not to me, you cannot be tied to me. Jesus does not accept competition. So even if his call is not externally for you to go and sell all that you have and give it to the poor right now in an immediate sense, still, there is a renunciation required of every disciple. It does not work to trust in Jesus while loving something else more than Jesus. Any attempt to add Jesus on to the priorities you already have doesn't work. He only comes if we put him at the top of all our priorities and allow him to change those priorities. That is the nature of true faith. It is a turning from whatever we loved more than God before, turning to God himself. Really, Jesus is happy to accept the very weak. You might think, wow, that requires quite a strength of will to love him more than all these other things. No, Jesus actually accepts the weak and the frail and the fragile and the sinful. He loves those people. He welcomes you to himself. The thing is, though, he does not accept competition, so he gives you your choice. You may say, I would like to have these things that I value most highly in life, and I would also like to have and honor Jesus. And Jesus says to you, no, you can choose one or the other. You cannot choose both. We see this today in Saul, the first king of Israel. Certainly, Saul had Yahweh on his list of priorities. He was very religious. But what we've seen throughout Saul's life is that Yahweh was not at the top of the list of Saul's priorities. At the top of the list of Saul's priorities was himself. It was his own rule, his own freedom, his own self-determination, him doing what he wants to do in order to maintain what he valued more than anything else in life, the dynasty of the house of Saul. And the reason we have this passage today is that through it, God presents to you what the end of a path like Saul's looks like. If you want to rule your own life, if you want to choose your own priorities and not have God come in and mess them up, this is what that results in. That's the path, this is the end. And it's set before us as a warning. Let's see this, the death of the first king of Israel, human king, in 1 Samuel 31, beginning in verse 1. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel. And the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword, or perhaps the sword of the armor-bearer, and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. All occurs just as Samuel had predicted only the day before, when Saul, contrary to God's law, had tried to summon him through a medium. Samuel said, "Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." And Israel would be defeated, and she was. Our passage today can be summarized in the words of Proverbs 14:12. "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death." And you might be able to see right there the problem we have with sin. It is that it seems right. If it didn't seem right, you wouldn't do it. It seems right because we justify sin. That is the deceptive nature of temptation. It seems right to us, especially when we take the created and put it just above God in our hearts. You can do this invisibly. It is done invisibly, although it shows itself in your behavior, but it's done in the secret places of the heart. So you can do it in a way that no one sees immediately. You might not even see it yourself. We justify these things. Perhaps there's pleasure, and really pleasure, some form of pleasure, has taken the highest place in your life. And we justify it by saying, well, we don't want to be stuffy Christians. You don't want to be puritanical. You want to show people you can be a Christian and have a good time. There may be some truth in what you're saying, but the reality is you say that to justify idolatry. Or you take a good thing like family and say, shouldn't we be family-oriented here? God has made me a father or a mother. I should value my children and care for them. I should know well the conditions of my flocks. That's my responsibility before God. All well and good. But the problem is that may be coming from a place of idolatry, that you love family more than God. And if the choice was given to you starkly and concretely, choose God or choose family, you'd choose family. But because the choice is not often given to you that concretely and starkly, you can fool yourself into thinking you have chosen God. And that is why a passage like this one is given to us. There is a way that seems right to a man. You may have felt some sympathy with Saul as we've read of his story because we see some of ourself in him. He has done almost right in many occasions. He has been religious in many ways. He has offered sacrifices to Yahweh. He has taken Yahweh upon his lips. But overall, he has proven that he is his own king. And he will not have any other king, Yahweh included, to rule over him. This passage is given to us to show us, if you have made that decision, that at the end of the day, no matter what God says, you have the final call. You are King of kings and Lord of lords. If that's the decision you've made, if you live your life in that way, it seems right now. And maybe things are going fine for you. This passage says, yes, but its end is death. This stands as a warning that we might not be like Saul. Let's listen to the warning then. And we're going to look at this passage in two halves. First, the way that seems right, and then where it leads, the end, which is in substance our passage today. Let's begin by looking at the way. I've already hinted at it. It is really a way of self-rule. That is the way that Saul lived his life all throughout 1 Samuel. So for this point, it's less about what's exactly in this text today, but more background preparing us for what's in this text. We need first to remember what is the way Saul has walked that has led him here. Now, if you remember this, it was a long time ago now, but when we studied back in chapter 9, the day before Samuel the prophet first met Saul, God had told Samuel, "Tomorrow about this time, I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines." Now contrast that from chapter 9 with these verses from chapter 31, verse 1. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And then the horrible outcome of verse 7. And when the men of Israel, who were on the other side of the valley of Jezreel, so probably on the north side there, and those beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. God's promise concerning Saul to Samuel was true. Saul did deliver the people from the Philistines. Remember? Saul had many victories. He had driven the Philistines out of the land. The Philistines were encroaching on the land. He had driven them out early in his reign. And now, it's undone. So much so that verse 7 shows that right in the middle of the land, the Philistines moved in. They are back encroaching on the land. And we might wonder why. He started out with such promise, literally a promise, that he would drive out the Philistines. He did, and now it's all reversed. What has happened? The answer is that God conditioned Saul's ongoing success upon Saul remembering that he's king number 2, not king number 1. His obedience, his submission to the higher kingship of Yahweh, had Saul recognized that, it would have gone well. But you may remember the warning Samuel had given to the people when they had really rejected Yahweh as their king to choose Saul in the first place. But Samuel had said, "If you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king." The people didn't want Yahweh as their king. They said, "Give us a human king." They got Saul. They preferred Saul to be the king. God forgave them. But then Saul just like the people, did not want Yahweh to be his king. He wanted Saul to be the king. He wanted what the people wanted. He preferred himself over Yahweh as king of the land. And this was not seen at first. You don't see this at first, but it was proven over time, especially in two instances. You may remember that in chapter 13, Samuel had told Saul, go to Gilgal and wait for me 7 days. I will offer a sacrifice. Then you fight the Philistines. And Saul had waited 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the 7th day. Samuel was nowhere to be seen. His men were scattering. He was afraid he would lose this battle, lose his kingship, lose his life. And so, even with God's clear command ringing in his ears, he forces his hand and he offers the sacrifice. It's just a small variation of God's plan. But it was a clear act of rebellion, an attempted coup d'etat of God's rule over his people. So Samuel told him, now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. And this was repeated, not a one-time event, but in chapter 15, when again he was commanded, Saul, wipe out the wicked Amalekites. And Saul went and wiped them out with a slight variation. He spared the king. God said, eliminate all the animals. He spared the animals because the people wanted to spare the animals. He was afraid of the people. Just a slight change, but you see, who's calling the shots here? God says, do this. Saul says, I'm going to do that. Because in Saul's mind, Saul is king first, Yahweh second. It is self-rule. Now, I do want you to notice that all throughout Saul's story, what we've seen is that this self-rule has been very religious, which is what makes it a very helpful example to us, a warning to us. Remember, even those two great acts of rebellion against God in chapters 13 and 15, chapter 13, what was the act that cost him the kingdom? A sacrifice to the Lord. Very pious seeming in itself. In chapter 15, when he spared the animals contrary to God's command, he said, I spared them to offer them as animal sacrifices to the Lord. Religious in every way. Even in his disobedience, religious. On the surface, you would look at Saul and see, what a religious man. What a pious man. But under the surface, it was self-rule. It was Saul's desire, even using religion, as many do, to just get what he wants. At the end of the day, he wants what he wants, and he will have it, and if Yahweh's in favor of it, great, he'll do what Yahweh says. And if Yahweh's not in favor of what Saul wants, then Saul does what Saul wants. Who cares what Yahweh says? That is the way that Saul has lived his life. It's not just a one-time thing, a second-time thing. This has been the characteristic of Saul's reign. Just became clear as time went on. This shows that you can effectively rule your own life in a very religious way. Jesus made this clear as well in Matthew chapter 7 when he said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. We are not saying that you are made right with God by just being good. Remember how I literally said the opposite of that just a minute ago? But if you trust in Jesus Christ, your heart changes. And the main way that your heart changes is that Christ becomes Lord. He's in charge. To put it in the Old Testament terms, Yahweh is king. Same thing. King. He has the authority. it does not result in a perfect obedience. David, the man after God's heart who is going to replace Saul, will disobey multiple times, and sometimes in severe ways. But the overall tenor of David's life is one of submission to Yahweh. He will not reach out his hand and touch the Lord's anointed, because the Lord's anointed is the Lord's anointed. Yahweh is king, and he chose Saul, and even if Saul is trying to murder me and my friends, I will not hurt him. That's one way of living. And Saul demonstrates for us the other way of living. However religious, whatever religious veneer you put on it, it's Saul's way or the highway. That's how Saul lived his life. That was his essential problem. He was his own king at the end of the day. Jesus would have said to Saul, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say?" Saul's way was one of a settled self-rule. Outside of Christ, for anyone here outside of Christ, for all of us before we knew Christ, that's our way of life too. Call it what you want, pretty it up, put some moral categories on it, make it look religious. Call it what you want, but at the end of the day, you want what you want, and you're going to do what it takes to get what you want. Use other people if you have to. Use religion if you have to. Use God if you need to. But get what you want. That kind of self-rule is the default setting of all people born into this world after the fall of Adam and Eve, because that was their essential sin as well. That is a way of life. Now, if you persist in that way of life all through this life, what will that mean at the end? That brings us now more closely to our passage as we come from the way of Saul to now the end of Saul. His way seems right to us, in a sense. We like to have the final say, self-determination. We're Americans. Give us freedom or give us death. It seems right that we would say, no one decides how I live my life but me. That seems right. It's the air we breathe. How does this kind of a life end? First of all, what we see in our passage is that those who want something other than God so much that they would sacrifice God to get it, in the end, will lose what they want. What did Saul want? Saul wanted not just his own kingship, he wanted a dynasty. He was concerned that he remain king, but also that his son be king, that the house of Saul be a dynasty that is remembered. That is what Saul wanted. There were other details of his life, but they were details. They all served this one idol of Dagon that stood tall in his heart. This is what he needed, and he would do anything, sacrifice anything, kill anyone to get this. You may remember in chapter 15 that after he defeated the Amalekites, or most of them, he went to Carmel and he, quote, set up a monument for himself. This is his dynasty. This is his kingship. In the following chapters, he got to the place where he was trying to murder an innocent man, David, his own servant, formerly his own armor bearer. He's trying to murder David, though David's done nothing wrong. David's only ever helped Saul. But you remember that seed of jealousy after David slew Goliath, and Saul heard the songs being sung in the streets praising David more than praising Saul. And at that moment, that idol of his heart was threatened. They like David more than me. They might take the house of Saul and make the house of David. So though David did nothing wrong, most of 1 Samuel has been the story of Saul trying to kill him. You remember that Saul told his own son Jonathan, as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. If David lives, our dynasty doesn't. And what you see now at the end of this way, where Saul has done everything trying to hold to this dynastic future for himself, is that in one moment, in one day, God shatters the house of Saul. That's the point of this passage. It's not any different than when the Ark of the Covenant went into the land of Philistia and they put that ark right in front of the idol Dagon. And so God took Dagon, dropped him on his face, cut off his hands, severed his head. That is what's happening in Saul in this scenario. Now, the Philistines in our passage have come into contact now with the Israelites. The battle that we've been seeing all these chapters being prepared, it's happened. Right there in the valley of Jezreel, Philistines on the north, Israelites on the south. Philistines have pushed the Israelites back up Mount Gilboa into their own camp. They are now on the run, the Israelites are. It says in verse 2, the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. And if you look at verse 6, it says Saul died and his 3 sons. But you know, there's a parallel account in 1 Chronicles 10 telling exactly the same story with this variation. Right at this point, verse 6, it says, Saul died, he and his 3 sons, and all his house died together. Technically, if you continue into 2 Samuel, you'll realize actually one of his sons survived, named Ishbosheth, who will for a short time take his place before being assassinated. Saul also had 2 sons through a concubine. But if you read on in 2 Samuel, you'll find because of Saul's own disobedience in his life, those 2 sons will also die. The house of Saul would continue, though, through his eldest daughter Merab, who had 5 sons who could carry on the line. Because of Saul's rebellion against Yahweh and disobedience, those 5 sons will also be put to death. Michal, his other daughter, she will be barren her whole life, no children. The only offspring that we know of that lives after Saul is Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, to whom David is very kind, a crippled man. Saul's house, his dynasty was his idol, and in this single day, I don't know if he saw it happen, if he was with his sons, but in this single day, his 3 main sons, Jonathan, who would take his throne, and then the successors after them, they die. They're dead. Saul himself is dead. The armor bearer is dead. His people, his bodyguards, they're dead. Everyone's dead. This is not just a death, it's an extreme kind of death. And that is on purpose to show you, if you take hold what you want and you say, I don't care what God says, I'll make it religious if I have to, but that's what I want. God says, in the end, either in this life, as is often the case, but if not, in the life to come, God will take that away. It is very much like a parent whose little toddler has gone and taken a marker, and the parent says, hey, give that to me. And what does the toddler do? The toddler turns his body like this. I know object permanence. I know it's still there. But the child is going to put up a fight. I'm going to have this marker. Now, as the parent is trying to reason with the child, hey, give that to me, what are the options? The child can give the marker. That's option number 1. Everything's good. But option number 2, which is most often chosen, is I will try to protect this marker. But you see, the much larger parent will get the marker one way or another. There's not any chance that the child will win that battle, that the parent says, I just can't get it from him. The parent will get the marker, but if the child tries to hold on to it, they'll get the marker and they'll be disciplined. That's the only difference. There's no question whether the marker goes away, and that is God's dealings with us. You can take an idol, hold on to it, make your whole life about it, try to keep it from God himself, but there's no question, he'll take it in the end. You're not bigger than God. You can't keep it. That's what our passage shows us as the house of Saul, that he labored his whole life, did anything necessary to keep, is ripped from his hands in a terrible way. Jesus put it this way, whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. The end of this path of self-rule is whatever you're trying to keep by your self-rule, you will lose it. But there's a second aspect to this, a bit paradoxical paradoxical here, and that is that in another sense, God actually gives Saul what he wanted. And this is the worst judgment. If you live a life of self-rule, it's terrible that God then takes what you tried to replace him with. Terrible for us, but right of him. But the worst judgment is that in another sense, he will give you what you want. Look at the death of Saul again here, a very extreme death in verses 3 to 5. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat or torture me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly, probably feared the Lord. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Now, it was right that the armor-bearer refused to do what Saul commanded him. Because you see, the armor-bearer, unlike Saul in this one moment, seems to have feared Yahweh as king more than Saul as king. There's something refreshing in that, even though the situation's terrible. David, you remember, he would have agreed with what the armor-bearer did or refused to do. David said, "Who can put his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" 2 Samuel begins with the story of an Amalekite who lyingly claims that he was the one who killed Saul at the end when Saul was wounded, thinking he would curry David's favor. David's response to him is, "How is it you were not afraid to put out your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" And he puts him to death. So the armor-bearer did right to refuse Saul's request. He would not put out his hand against the Lord's anointed. And so what Saul does here at the end is Saul, once more, characteristic of his entire life, decides that he will rule over himself, no matter what Yahweh says. And he takes his own life. That is his last act of self-rule in this case. Now, if you think of it, what has been Saul's highest preoccupation? Yes, his house. But what has occupied his thoughts the most in the last years leading up to this terrible defeat? It has been this: the death of David. That is what Saul has planned. You remember he tried first to do it in covert ways. He tried to have David married to his daughter so the Philistines would target him. That was Saul wanting David to get into this exact situation. Saul wished that David was the one with an arrow sticking out of him, about to be overcome by the Philistines. He started trying that, but the Lord was with David. It didn't happen. He tried other things until finally the direct approach. He took out the best man of Israel and they hunted David in the wilderness time and time again to kill him. Did David do any wrong? Jonathan says, "What wrong has David done?" David says, "What wrong have I done?" No wrong. But you threaten Saul's idol. You threaten Saul's dynasty. So that has been Saul's main desire, to kill David. But who was David? David, if you remember, had been anointed already by Samuel to be the next king. Saul was the Lord's anointed, but David also was the Lord's anointed. What Saul wanted the most of anything was to kill the Lord's anointed. And there is a sense in this passage in which God says, if that's what you want, then that's what you get. And the last act of Saul is what he sought for years and years. He kills the Lord's anointed. Only in this case, it's himself. He gets what he wants, but it's not what he thought he wanted. That is the end of every path of self-rule. God gives him what he wanted, and that is the tragic end. For you as well, if you live a life of self-rule. Not only will you not get really what you ultimately want, it will be taken from you, but on the other hand, you will get what you want. If you say, I don't want God, I want something else, I don't want God, then in the end, there is a rightness to God's judgment when he says, fine, then you don't get me. You say, well, that's not what I meant. That's what you meant. That's what you said. You wanted something else. You didn't want God. You don't get God. If you say, I don't want Christ to rule over my life, well, then you would hate heaven. He rules visibly in heaven. You don't want that. Why would you want to go there? So God gives to you what you want, but see, it's not what you think. Satan makes it seem like a life detached from your Creator, where you rule yourself, is what you want. But a life detached from your Creator is a life detached from life. And the only thing there is out there detached from life itself is death. If you want death so bad, God says in the end, and I will give you death. Really, even through this message, for anyone holding out any part of their life from God, this is God, the parent, saying, hey, give me the marker now. And you do have a choice there, huh? You can try to hold on to it. It will not end well. That's what this passage is all about. The alternative option, the one we see in David instead, is one not of perfection, but of surrender. When you surrender to God's authority, to His kingship, when He says, give me the marker, give me your life, trust in me, turn from ruling yourself, come under my rule. And when you do that, you get a new heart with new desires, and God satisfies them all with Himself. Hosea 13:11 tells us, the Lord speaking to Israel, I gave you a king in my anger, and I took him away in my wrath. Probably referring to this. But then the Lord pleads with Israel, return, O Israel, to the Lord your God. And that is what He pleads with you. Turn to the Lord your God. His promise to them and to you, if you do turn to Christ, is, I will heal their apostasy. I will love them freely, for my anger has turned from them.